Hi, it's George Nordhaus, and welcome to Monday Morning. Today we are going to have what may be one of the most important presentations every agency manager will ever hear because it talks about producer compensation. And it has been a very confusing uh, situation for a long time. But if anybody knows the answer to that, it's Al Diamond, who's president of the Agency Consulting Group. He's, as you know, probably our most prolific speaker, presenter, etc. And there's Al, he's been with it for, gosh, how many years, Al? Have you been in the business?
Oh, almost as long as you. It's
No,
been
buddy.
over. It's over 40.
Add another decade to that and you might catch up with me, will you? But he runs the agency consulting group and he puts out the pipeline. And we really recommend the pipeline, which I think, and I have said this many times, is the best agency management monthly newsletter there is. If you don't take the pipeline, you should. At any rate, and he speaks everywhere all over, and he's been around 45 years. Whoa, that's a pretty long one. Well, Al, let's talk about agency compensation. It is confusing. I've always been confused with it. I always heard of 40-40, 40 new and 40 renewal and like that. But it ain't that way anymore, is it?
No, it isn't, George. You and I both remember. Not forget the 40-40, but when you started, when I started, it was always 50-50.
Oh,
50 new and
yeah.
50 renewal. And you know what? You would be shocked by how many agencies still pay 50 new and 50 renewal to get and keep what they consider their good productive producers. Unfortunately, they're hurting themselves at the same time, and that's why we transitioned producer compensation. Because in our opinion, fair compensation has to motivate producers to do two things: to grow the client base of the agency and to retain the clients. It's also obviously got to give competitive compensation, because otherwise you'll lose your good producers and keep your deadwood.
Right.
However, we transfer value from the agency to the producer, but not based on the producer's goals and objectives. And that's what most of the agencies that we know of have fallen into. The producer decides how much he wants to work. The producer decides how much money he wants to make, or how many clients he wants to service. It's not the agency's objectives, it's the producer's. And it should be the agency's objectives because, believe it or not, the agency has to earn a profit on the producer's efforts. And while that, I mean, it seems sort of
That's
simplistic, doesn't
pretty
it?
obvious, yeah, obviously. But
Well, if I tell you that most agents do not make money on the producer's efforts, they lose money on the producer's efforts. They make money on the house accounts. And that's really a shame, because producers should be feeding both themselves and the agency.
mhm.
So we decided to do it a little bit differently. Now, historically, uh, we're used to insurance agencies paying new and renewal commissions, because once upon a time it was much harder to generate new business than it was to keep renewals. Most of the renewals just stayed with you once you got them. May not be exactly the case anymore, and I'm sure many agencies listening to this will agree with that. And I remember the time, and there still are in many agencies, where a producer got a salary,
Mhm.
either modest or generous,
Mhm.
plus a commission bonus based on how much they produced. And the traditional percentages of 50-50 doesn't work anymore, but you would be absolutely shocked, George, to hear about what percentage, how many agencies still pay their producers 50% new and 50% renewal.
I didn't know that at all. I still thought it was. I've been telling everybody 40%, 40 for 100 years. I'm glad you told me that.
Well, the actual standard, and you know that we run probably 4,000 agents through our database now, and the average industry-wide right now is 40-25. It's 40% on new,
Uh-huh.
25% on
Okay.
renewals.
All right.
And yes, I agree with you, George. There are lots of agents who pay 40%, some who pay 15% and a heavier front end. There is as many ranges of compensation as there are agencies out
Mhm.
there.
Mhm.
But the old way doesn't work anymore. We've come up with what I call Diamond's Law of Retention. what happens is that agents suffer their greatest retention losses on new accounts with whom strong relationships are not yet built. Because once an account is used to you and likes you and has been with you for several years, they stick to you better. But that first year is the most dangerous. And if you have good, solid producers who like building relationships, they'll have that relationship with the client before they ever write them. However, most agents don't have this. They get their customers still, unfortunately, by pricing. And you know our feelings about the pricing strategy. We've talked about this quite often. And then they spend the first year, we hope they spend the first year or two, cementing their relationship with their clients so that the client has a better reason to stay with the agency than to leave for the next $50 or $100 or $1,000 in premium discount that they can get from someone else. But this is, the retention losses are greatest in the first year.
Okay.
But there's also other things that happens that paying the old way doesn't work. One, agencies pay higher rates for new business, then they lose the account when the agency is taking less commission, and they continue to pay producers to replace that same volume with more new business. Makes no sense at all. So if I'm paying 40-25, I'm paying 40% for new business, then the chances are greatest that I'll lose that business within a year or two, where the agency gets the bulk of the money. And then when the producer puts on more new business to replace the new business I just lost, we pay him the higher percentage again. Now, on top of that, when you're talking about especially the 50-50 agencies and agents who are listening to this, think about your own operating statements. Doesn't it cost you more than 50% of the commission dollar to operate your agency? If it does, how on earth can you pay more 50% to a producer every year on that same business? They're called loss leaders. You lose money every year. Well, the old saying, you don't lose a little bit on every sale and make it up in volume. It doesn't work quite that way. So, continuing why the old way doesn't work, there's another rule that I made up. It's called the rule of soft market inverse returns. Here's what happens. You sell a policy 10 years ago at $30,000 premium and a 20% commission. You make $6,000 on it. This is before you pay your producers. Then we have the longest soft market we've ever had in many parts of the country. In other parts it's been floating or it's harder, but in most parts those premium dollars have been forced down by competitive nature because of the insurance companies, by rates and so on. And not only have the premiums been driven down, but the commissions have as well. So now that $30,000 account has become $10,000, and that 20% commission has become 12%, and so you're only making $1,200 on that account every year anyway.
Gross.
And then
gross.
Right, gross. And then finally, your expenses, not only are there more than 50% of the commission dollar at the outset, but the pressure for you because of pay increases to your staff, rent increases, and general increases in costs, your expenses continue to rise as the premiums and commissions decrease. You know who gets squeezed here. The producers don't take less, it's the owners.
Absolutely.
So, does 50-50 still make sense?
I don't think so.
I don't think so either. So, the final issue is that the agency and the producer have to remarket competitive insurance products as strongly on renewal as they used to do on new business only. We have a bunch of, we were in an agency last week where they have 5 producers. The complaint is not that they don't have enough to do. The complaint is that they have so much pressure to do competitive quoting and bidding and comparisons on their renewals that they don't have enough time to do all the prospecting that we provide to them. And we can flood you with prospects. I mean, that may have been a problem once but automation and the state of the industry today, prospects are easy to get. It's just a matter of following up with them.
Mm-hmm.
But we don't have time because we're working on our renewals. Does it still make sense to pay more commissions on new business than on renewals? Not only 50-50, but does it make sense to pay more, a top end, on new business and disregard the renewals? What is the producer going to go after if you pay him 40 or 50% on new business and only 20 or 25% on renewals? What do you think he's going to go after?
Well, pretty obvious. Yeah.
Yeah, he's going to pay more attention where the dollars come from.
Absolutely.
So we've come up with a number of solutions, and I'm going to give you a brief on some of them and go into the point of this conversation. First of all, we need to revise producer compensation to meet agency objectives. Those objectives is high retention. That retention should be above 90% and hopefully above 92%. And by the way, agents listening to this, that retention is not the dollars. Those go up and down because of the pressures of the economy. The retention is of customers. You got to keep your customers. When the market hardens and you have a 90 or 95% customer retention, you will be in great shape. If you have an 85% customer retention, a hard market's not going to help you. You'll be out of business long before that. And not only do you have to retain your customers, you have to have continuous customer growth. The measure of an agency's success, and we're one of the largest valuing firms in the country, so this is a part of our valuations, is whether they're growing their customers every year. Now, we can use automation to enhance productivity. Even as agency revenue is challenged by softening markets or other pressures or lowering commissions, most agencies don't use their automation enough to make up for that. That automation can make your people more productive. We don't have time to talk about that today. But we put producers on the street to sell new prospects, and we need active prospecting implemented by the agency instead of by producers. No longer is it the producer's responsibility to find people to insure. It's the agent's responsibility. And we can help any agent who wants to talk to us find what their target market should be and how to find those prospects. All you got to do is call us. Now let's get down to what we're here about. The base and growth compensation. Instead of marketing to our producers with a higher front-end new business and lower renewal commission, what we do is we make last year's total book of business become the base for that producer. So if I'm a producer for your agency, George, and I've produced $200,000 of gross agency commission, I'm going to get a certain percentage of that as my guaranteed compensation for the next year, and then I'm going to get more for growing that business. So whether you want to pay salary, which is fine, or a draw, which is fine, or straight commissions, either way, any of those is fine. The compensation for producers will become the same until this year's total book commission reaches last year's total agency commission for that producer. Very easy to determine. If I have a $200,000 book of business December 31st, I get the same amount of compensation for the year, for the following year, until I have achieved that $200,000 level. Now, if I'm a stable producer, it may be October, November, or December. But if I'm a growing producer, I'm going to fight to reach that level as early in the year as possible, because I want to break into the higher bonus commission.
Got it.
And that's next. Because when I hit that number, I'm paid a bonus commission for every dollar written and paid for the rest of the year. And that's where I make my additional money. And then rewash and repeat, like, shampooing hair. Next year repeats the progress. So next year, instead of 200,000, my book of business may be 2.25 or 250. I'll get a percentage of that as my compensation guaranteed for next year. And once I hit that number, then the growth over that number gives me my bonus.
Got it.
It's really as simple as that. So if the agency paid the amount that's average in the industry, 40% new and 25% for renewals previously, that shouldn't be growth, that should be renewals.
Okay.
Then the producer's compensation will be based on 25% of the base commission until last year's total is reached, regardless of policy type. It doesn't matter where that money comes from. So every dollar that's booked to that producer's code counts. And then the producer gets another 15% up to 40 for all growth commissions generated for the rest of the year. And then rinse and repeat. Next year, this year's total becomes his base, and the earlier he reaches that level, it qualifies him for that growth commission again. Then, on top of that, we have success tiers. This is what we've named at Agency Consulting Group the golden handcuffs. Here's the fact. Large producers are worth more to you than small producers. Is that a question?
No.
Do you agree?
Of course.
I mean, if a producer generates $500,000 of commission for your agency, isn't he worth more to you than one who generates $50,000 or $100,000?
I would think so.
Sure. Why are we compensating all of our producers the same? Compensate them accordingly. The larger producers are worth more and should be paid more. So, one of the things that we found when we've done our financial analysis of agencies is that we can identify how profitable a producer is to the agency. And what we've found is that the larger the producer, the more profit he makes for the agency. Again, not brain surgery, it makes sense. And as that profitability increases by 10% or more, we split that with the producer and give him a 5% raise. That's both on base and growth. Normally, it's somewhere between $200,000 and $300,000. That's been our experience in the last 10 or 15 years. And then again, between $500,000 and $600,000. And then again, between $700,000 and $800,000 or $900,000. And what you have is you have golden handcuffs, because if you pay those producers more as they grow, it's much harder for them to leave you for someone else. I'm not assuming that they don't like you, but they will be tempted by other producers, by other agents to move their book of business, or at least move themselves. Well, two things stop them. Number one, if we pay them at a very high rate, which is affordable to us because they're producing a lot of revenue for us, the other agent won't be able to pay them the same without risking an awful lot, assuming, of course, you have a non-compete and non-piracy, and you're protected. As the producer reaches higher profit levels, we pay them more. And then finally, we look at equity. For many generations, we've been paying producers equity in their own book of business. George, you know that we're not in favor of that.
I know.
Because we've been arguing for years in court, we're expert witnesses on this, that a book of business of an agency belongs to the agency, not to a producer. So what we do is we want to give them equity if they're justified getting equity in the agency, not in their book of business. That way, the equity in a book of business supports the theory of separate ownership in court. So a court has come back and says, if you've given him 50% ownership in his book of business, you've just defined it as his book of business, and it can be separated. We don't do that. What we suggest is that the agency is made up of a whole, and the producer is a relationship manager within the agency. So what we do is we say, give them, if they're awarded such, if equity is something that will keep them, give them equity in the agency, even if it's a very small piece or a minority interest, because now they're interested in the success of the whole agency, not just in the book of business that they've created. And we don't create the incentive for a producer to leave with a book of business trying to buy it out. If we end up owning half and they own half and they decide to walk away and start their own agency, some agents actually have a piece in the contract that allows the producer to buy out their book of business. What good is that if you've spent 10 years paying a producer most of your income, most of your profit, to build your book of business, and then they turn around and walk away with it. The producer should be a cog, a very important cog, but should be a cog in the agency wheel, not an independent entity in himself.
You know,
That's
this,
what allows you to build a level of profit and a level of value in your agency. Go
yeah,
ahead, George.
I was just going to say this slide is probably one of the most important slides that I have ever seen in all these years of doing this. That slide is so vital, and so few people think of it that way. At least it's not my experience to see them think of it so much. I love this. I
George,
love.
you know I'm involved in AIMCO, the American Association of Insurance Management Consultants.
I know you are.
AIMCO.com, guys, for anyone who is interested in finding out who that entity is. We've done the standards and guidelines of valuing insurance agencies. We're publishing this year an update to that, but we've just finished our annual convention, and coming out of it is a new white paper that we're going to be researching. It will take a while to put together, on non-competes and non-piracies in insurance agencies,
Oh,
trying to fight the tide of the deterioration of ownership rights of agency owners. The reason that we're doing this is because without non-competes and non-piracies and a certain level of ownership that's guaranteed in the agency on its book of business, insurance agencies in the future will be worth less and less. Because if you can't protect your own book of business, then you can't protect the value of the agency.
well, that's important. Well, I'm glad you told us that. How will people eventually? Well, I'll keep them apprised of that and how they can get hold of this. You going to make it available to the world, or what do you?
Oh yeah, it's going to be a public document at no cost. I mean, the standards and guidelines of valuing insurance agencies can be found at AIMCO as well as at my website, and that's my website. And that's given to every court in the country and every agency at no cost. And the white paper on non-competes and non-piracies are meant to support insurance agency rights to the ownership of their business in courts. So it will take a while to judiciously go through that process, but you should see something within a year or so.
That's beautiful. I tell you now, may I make a suggestion to everybody who sees this? Subscribe to Pipeline. I mean, I don't know, there's like 5,000 people, agencies subscribe to it, and it's just terrific. And I would suggest you do that. You
You're
can
going to
go,
have to,
well,
you got to multiply that by 3 now, George.
why? You think? I hope.
Yeah, we have a lot more than that.
Oh, you do? I didn't know that. Well,
Yeah.
golly Moses, that's good news. And so in the meantime, you can get hold of Al, and he responds, and he's got a great staff that I know pretty well after all these years. And it's just, to me, this is what a consulting organization should be. But Al, you covered more space in a shorter period of time than ever. And for the rest of you, if you haven't listen to Al's previous Monday mornings, go back into agenciesonline.biz and look at Monday morning, and go page down. There's this archive of 150 or more of them, and you'll see Al there a number of times. These are tops, and I think every agency ought to have it. So Al, all I can do again is thank you, and thank you again for sharing. It's such a pleasure to work with you, and it's always fun because I learn a lot. Yeah. What?
Always my pleasure, George. Always my pleasure, George.
Well,
The more people who get this information, not just from me, but from all the Monday morning participants, the more knowledgeable they are, the more they can make their agency successful.
I totally agree, and I thank you again. For the rest of you, I'll see you again next Monday morning.